Hi, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of Infinite Danger Room, a weekly podcast hosted at newsok.com. I'm Matt Price. I'm here today with our regular panelists, two of the three of them, Matt Howlett and Anthony Brown. What we want to look at today is Justice League Action. It's a new Cartoon Network show that features Justice League characters, some of the top-line DC superheroes, as you might guess. And the first episode is what we've watched so far, so we're going to talk a little bit about what we thought worked about it, what we liked, what maybe we hope to see in the future. In short, it's sort of a new Justice League show. Doesn't necessarily follow up on any previous continuity, but features fairly iconic versions of the characters in sort of shorter bursts of adventure. The first episode was hour long, but I think in general they're going to be 30 minutes and have sort of two adventures in each one. And this one, while they were kind of split up in the pilot, the adventures all kind of tied together at the end and featured first new looks at several animated characters, Superman, Wonder Woman, and many others. So why don't we just I'll kind of go around and let everybody give first impressions, and then we can kind of talk about maybe more specifics about what we like. So Anthony, I'll go to you.
Anytime Kevin Conroy is the voice of Batman, I'm in. The animation was a little young for my taste, especially coming after the most recent DC animated adventure in Young Justice, which is going to make its return. But I enjoyed it for what it was. I think it's something you can definitely enjoy with your kids and introduce them to a lot of characters from the DC universe. There's some fun characters to play with that they maybe don't know. Swamp Thing. I think Constantine may be a little bit much to introduce your kids to, but the fact that they couldn't understand, very much of what he was saying, that was fun to play with. Booster Gold is always a lot of fun when he's done right. The same thing with Plastic Man. I look forward to some interplay between them. I also enjoyed the Martian Manhunter. I thought he was very well portrayed in this. It seemed like he was new to the Earth in his appearance on the show, so a lot of fun characters to build around.
We saw Green Arrow, we saw Cyborg, we saw Martian Manhunter, we saw Shazam / Captain Marvel, we saw Plastic Man, Booster Gold, Swamp Thing, and John Constantine, which was a little bit of a surprise. Now, I had just read that Shazam 75 Years of the Earth's Greatest Heroes with some of the origin stuff, and so I thought it played with a lot of that. It gave you the origin, the wizard, it gave you the subway, it gave you the 7 deadly sins kind of stuff. Set up a lot of the stuff that gives that character his basis, and also played with the idea that he's a kid who becomes a superhero. So I thought it was a good introduction to the Shazam Captain Marvel mythos, if you weren't familiar with that at all.
I'm actually not really familiar with Captain Marvel or Shazam, I guess is that what they call him, but so is the subway part of his mythos?
In the original one, Billy Batson is I think he sells newspapers, and somebody says, "Hey, kid, down the subway," which, great. But he goes down the subway, and all of a sudden the guy disappears, and he's in this Rock of Eternity place where the wizard introduces him to the things that will give him his powers. So so that's part of the mythos that you'd see in Captain Marvel. It's kind of a long, unusual story, just a short sidebar. I won't go to the whole thing, but the wizard's name is Shazam. The hero's name was Captain Marvel, but Captain Marvel faced lawsuits from DC because he was published by Fawcett. He went out of publication for a while. Eventually, DC licensed maybe first and then bought the character. But by the time they got around to bringing him back, Marvel had come along and had introduced Captain Marvel, and so they had lost the trademark to calling Captain Marvel in the title of a book. So the titles of his books usually are something like Shazam, like The Power of Shazam or whatever, but the character's name is Captain Marvel. Although I think in the most recent comic book, they maybe even started calling the character Shazam, just because I think a lot of people call him Shazam anyway. Mm-hmm. But in reality, Captain Marvel is the superhero, Shazam is the wizard. But I think even in modern DC continuity, they've gone a little bit to if you're all going to call him Shazam anyway, But anyway, so that's a little bit of the reasoning behind that.
As a kid, growing up, because I would see him in DC promotional material every once in a while, I always thought he was Shazam. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until I got a little bit older and started really reading the comics, they would reference him as Captain Marvel. Probably my first intro to him was in Alex Ross and Mark Waid's
Kingdom Come. Fantastic story.
That was probably my first introduction to him in my adult comic book collecting, and I like the character. I had actually read a Captain Marvel specific comic. So
the stuff he did in the 40s was actually, for a while he was out selling Superman, which is why they tried to sue and get rid of him. They were just saying, hey, he's got a cape, he's got black hair, he can fly. too close. And I think Fawcett eventually either won or was going to win, but they lost so much money and comic sales were starting to go down because you're getting into the 50s at that point that it all ended up being kind of a moot point. But that's why you saw him go away. But he was definitely the best-selling comic book in the 40s for a while. He had a lot of more... It was like Superman stuff, but even had a little more humorous stuff to it. He had, Uncle Marvel and Mary Marvel and the tiger that turned into a Marvel. So a lot of very kid-friendly stuff, but it's very innovative, too. If you look at some of the original stuff, there was a story called the Captain Marvel versus the Monster Society of Evil that was like a 25-part story when that really wasn't done throughout Captain Marvel Adventures. So that stuff is really good. Part of the reason you don't see as much of that stuff reprinted is because because of the time, a lot of unfortunate racial stereotypes. I mean, especially Asian, but some other stuff too, because you're getting into World War II type stuff. So you don't necessarily see a lot of it reprinted. And it's obviously aimed at kids, but it's hard to say. And I think while on one level you might be like, well, these stories would still be good for kids, it's hard to get around some of the stuff of the era to get to the part that they would like. So I think that's why you don't see a lot of it reprinted as much as you might otherwise. But they did kind of find some stuff to reprint in that 75th anniversary book that's pretty good. I mean, there's some good stuff in the archives too, but I think they always kind of have to couch it in. Some of this stuff is very of its time. So, but that said, for a while he was the best-selling superhero out there, and so it's good to kind of see him being updated in a way, because obviously kids were the audience. Kids are who's going to get something out of a kid that can say a magic word and turn into a superhero. Mm-hmm. So putting him in a show like this makes a lot of sense.
I think from a character development standpoint, I think that Shazam is kind of what Superman should be, because their power sets are eerily similar, but he's more developed. His rogues gallery is I mean, almost on point, but he has a lot of really good stories in his history. When you can get around, like you said, some of the stereotypes of the era. So I look at him and say, if Superman, like if only they had went a similar direction with Superman, especially with his supporting cast. With a lot of Superman, it's, hey, there's Lois Lane, hey, there's, Jimmy, and here's, here's the Daily whatever planet, there we go, the Daily Planet where he works. And his cast were a lot of mortals, but with Shazam, he does have the entire Marvel family to help him and support him and carry him through and bring those light moments. But with Superman, it's a lot of go save them, go save this, go save that. With a lot of Shazam, you get to see the interplay of the family. And I guess with Superman, him being an orphan is a big part of his story. But I guess, looking at him now, I would have loved to have seen the character development from the, a wider spectrum of supporting characters in the character development. I feel like they're doing that now with the Rebirth story, with Lois, with his son, the Justice League things that he's appearing in. But, and so he was an interesting character to see in the cartoon as well, because in the first story surrounds Batman, and Batman is there and he's fighting and he's involved. And then the second story involves Superman and Wonder Woman, and to see him fight the Parasite and watch those two fight, I thought that was a lot of fun to bring that character back and revamp his appearance. Also, what they did with him absorbing evil as part of his power set and then kind of rampaging throughout. That's a lot of fun. They did recycle, a lot of old Parasite traps, but, I guess if you're going to use this as an introduction to DC Comics and to a lot of the characters, the foil for Parasite was something that they recycled in some Young Justice cartoons and other previous shows where, he absorbs somebody's powers that has a weakness to this or that, and all of a sudden he has it too, and then game over.
One thing that was a recent show as well, pretty recent anyway, was the Batman Brave and the Bold, which also served as like an introduction. You had your Batman, and then you would introduce a character to kind of go along, Mr. Miracle, or whoever that week would be. This kind of takes it to yet another level. This is almost, I think, maybe a modern Super Friends is kind of what they're going for. Like, okay, you're
Hall of Justice,
5 to 12 or so, and this is all of our superheroes, and we're going to bring them in different parameters. But like, when I was growing up, you had Super Friends, and that's how you got to know, that's what Aquaman's powers are. Oh, that's what Batman's power is. Well, what he does. That's what Superman can do. And so by the time you'd watch Super Friends for a couple years, you were very familiar with the basic idea of the DC universe. And I think they could do something similar here, although given just how storytelling has evolved, there'll probably even be, stuff that holds up a little better in the long term too.
The show reminded me of Batman: Brave and the Bold, which came out about 6-7 years ago. Maybe
Really that long ago? You're probably right.
At least I think.
Yeah, I love that show, and that's something that did remind me of.
It came out,
yeah,
so that longer than. But it's almost like Justice League, Brave and the Bold. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Just because it's like, you have your Trinity characters: Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, but it seemed like every little act of the show introduced a guest starring Justice League character, whether it's the beginning with Shazam, the second act was with Martian Manhunter, third act was with
Green Arrow.
The fourth act was basically Justice League Dark. Well,
more
loosely,
or less. Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
But
Booster Gold showed up. Yeah.
yeah, and I mean,
Interesting note on Booster Gold, that's the guy who voiced Batman in Batman Brave and the Bold. Dietrich Bader is doing the voice of Booster Gold in the show. And he's the guy who voiced Batman in Batman Brave and the Bold. So
my favorite episode of Batman Brave and the Bold is when Batman met a Space Ghost. So they spent some time together, fought some villains, and then they both complained about their kid sidekicks. It was a lot of fun.
I haven't seen that episode, but I have to check it out.
It's so in every you've seen Brave and the Bold, but in every episode of Brave and the Bold, there's like a 5 or a 10 minute short before the main episode, and that's actually what it was the short before the main episode. But that was so phenomenal to see Batman and Space Ghost teaming up out there in space. So
I'll have to try to rewatch those. I wonder if they're on Netflix. I know they were at one point.
That's a great question. I don't know if they're still on Netflix. I know that the DVDs can be had pretty cheap these days, so, and I think they're on Blu-ray too if you're interested in those.
Check it out.
Another interesting thing is Mark Hamill's in the voice cast as Swamp Thing, so that's kind of a DC classic guy known for his Joker, and he's back. And I think Kevin Conroy being back is huge for people who have that voice in their head as Batman. That once it starts, you're basically right there. I don't think that it doesn't take you very much to buy into this being Batman when you've got that voice coming out of the character.
That was one voice that I heard him talking. I was thinking, I've heard this voice before. I don't know who this is, and I actually watched the credits at the end and saw Mark Hamill as Swamp Thing.
Oh, right.
I was kind of blown away by that. I feel like he doesn't do as much voice acting. I mean, he does the Joker in the Batman video games, but I haven't seen him in a whole lot of stuff.
Yeah, he had done a lot, and then I think maybe now with Star Wars taking off, he probably maybe doesn't have as much time as he did there to do it for a while.
Yeah, of course, he didn't really have a speaking role in Force Awakens, but hopefully he'll have a larger part in this episode.
I'm assuming he does, but that's kind of a sidebar. But I do think he's done more live action stuff, and he's got a show on Con TV that's kind of fun, where he goes around and looks at collections. It's kind of a fun show. It's like Mark Hamill's Quest. I should have the title in front of me, but a guy from Oklahoma is one of the producers of it as well, and so he goes around and just looks at different people's collections and kind of talks about the history of them and so on. So that's kind of fun. It's on Con TV. The guys that do the web channel based on Comic-Con. So,
okay, gotcha. Cool.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. So anyway, that's kind of a fun show too. We're kind of sidebarring a little bit. Let's see. Cyborg was voiced by Carrie Payton, right? And that was the same voice as Teen Titans Go, which is kind of cool. Gives you a little bit of continuity there.
Right.
Green Arrow sounded good to me. Constantine, like I said, they kind of did the little funny bit. I don't know. Any negatives that come to mind immediately?
For me, I thought it was a little kiddie, so I don't know that. I can watch some younger cartoons by myself. But this one skewed really young to where it's like I may tune in and out. I don't know that I'm going to set it to record the entire series because my son's 2, and so I don't think that he has interest in it right now. If it's not Bubble Guppies or Monster Trucks, then he's not interested.
Maybe a year or two old for him and a few years young for you.
Exactly. So I don't know. So we'll see. I may set it to... Actually, take that back. I may set it to record and see what characters make guest appearances because I want to see how they weave other members of the Justice League in and out. That was actually something that I enjoyed in some other shows. Even the cameo appearances that people made in the old Justice League cartoon that ran for a couple of seasons. You'd see the Atom Smasher and Obsidian running around in the background. They would never talk, but you see those characters make appearances here and there. So it'd be great to see some of those characters make appearances and see how they're used and if they show up in the future.
Yeah, it's not Justice League Unlimited exactly, where you had a very deep storyline. This is obviously aimed a little more at a younger age group, but given how much DC has gone dark in the film world, I think it's good to have some balance. You've got maybe a certain age group being being met by those films. You have the TV shows that are maybe skewing slightly younger than that, and then cartoons where you're skewing slightly younger than that again. And then, of course, there's also the direct-to-DVD stuff. So hitting all the age groups is okay with me, even if every one of them isn't something that I'm going to watch. This is one that, I might kind of catch it. I mean, it's almost to the point, my youngest is 9, and so she's probably the only one that's kind of in the wheelhouse. The others are maybe starting to age out of maybe this particular show into more of the Supergirl Flash TV show type stuff. But that said, if you've got kids that are younger, probably 5, 9 in there, yeah, that's probably something they're going to like. What do you think, Matt?
Well, I have a 5-year-old daughter, and my selling point for this show to get her to watch it with me was, this is a show starring Wonder Woman, Batman, and Superwoman. I start out with Wonder Woman. If I start out with Superman or Batman, immediately not interested.
Yeah.
And she was interested, and she watched the whole thing with me, and probably paid more attention to it than I did. But she enjoyed it. But one thing I thought the show was lacking, and maybe that's just the problem with Justice League, there's only one female lead in it.
Yeah.
Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
Even though there are other female Justice League characters, and my daughter, that's important to her with female characters. I know that DC has their superhero girls,
right, which is
but
skews the other way.
That's, from my knowledge, really just 2 45-minute long cartoons, if I'm not mistaken, that have just been released direct to DVD.
There's some stuff on the website. There's some web shorts,
there are a couple of
and there's some books, a couple of novels. They're rolling it out a little more like Monster High as far as what they're, I think, comping to on that one, where it's a limited amount of animated content, a pretty big toy line, some novels, some comics. I mean, I think that's more... There's different ways you can roll these things out, and I think with Superhero Girls, they're kind of following that Monster High template, where there's a little less animated content than in something like where you're going with the whole series to back, your toy line and so on.
So I guess what I would say is maybe introduce more female characters, even if it's just a little side story where...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, another point along those lines is it's pretty white. I mean, you got Cyborg in it, nobody of any other... Right? I mean, there's no Asians or Hispanics or anything. They're pretty much all...
Yeah, but I mean, that kind of goes back to the famous comic book day trivia question, like name 10 black superheroes without black in their name. So, when we talk about diversity in comic book characters, I mean, there's not really a lot there. Like, they're moving towards that currently, but I feel like that's actually one of the weak spots for DC is a lot of their main characters are males, and Marvel has done a little bit better job, adding female characters, even creating some new characters. Like you see how Spider-Gwen and even Gwenpool have really, really taken off. But can you name the last new DC female character, or even the last new DC character that has been created recently that has had a lot of traction and that has taken off? For the most part, they're very in lockstep with their history, I think, whereas Marvel is willing to, explore a little bit more and give some of their creators, whether I like them or not, a lot more freedom to go out and do some of these things. And I think that this could be an opportunity for them to do maybe what Marvel did with a character like X-23, who was actually created for the X-Men Evolution cartoon, then showed up in the comics, and then kind of took off from there. This may be an opportunity for DC to create a new character, plug her into the cartoon, maybe plug her into some comics, and then hopefully let them cultivate from there.
Well, and DC is, I don't want to say they haven't tried, because obviously you look at what they did with Aqualad and Young Justice. I think they've made some efforts. I think sometimes it's hard to for those efforts to land, but I think they've made some efforts, and hopefully we'll see that continue. I'm sure they're aware of the fact that it's a pretty white, pretty male cast, and to some degree they may be saying, well, we're countering, this is the opposite of the Superhero Girls, maybe, where it's going to be a little more male. But I'm sure I'm relatively sure anyway that it's something they'd be aware of, and that they'll maybe as we see it go on, they'll introduce some more characters. They actually have some characters in their roster that you could give some greater prominence to, and if it's a deal where every week it's maybe Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and then 4 or 5 different people from the DC stable,
Right.
you could see a pretty wide variety by the time you get to the end of the first season. So that would be great if that's something that they can do. I know it's tough as far as when you look at those. You're going to sell a certain amount of, if you get into comics, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman are going to maybe sell a certain amount of comics, and then who beyond that is going to sell comics? And Marvel's done a good job. They had Chris Claremont for a lot of years, who whenever he was writing X-Men, I think was like, why can't this be a woman? Could this be somebody who's not, white? I think he did a good job of introducing a lot of that, and so they sort of had those characters populating, whereas I'm not sure that happened as much with DC. I don't know. Why don't I let you guys touch on that for a minute?
Okay. Well, for me with Marvel, I think that the line itself is not as strong as it used to, but I think that has to do with a lot of their reboots and jumping on and jumping off points, and I guess my personal opinion, a lack of legacy numbering. I'm a huge fan of that because, for me, one of the great things that in comics is when you get into a comic, yeah, you may jump on at issue 648 or whatever of a title, but you kind of want to know what happened back before then that led up to this point, and then you just kind of work to fill in the gaps and learn about different stories along the continuity line. So I think that that's where Marvel has won the battle over time, but I think that currently DC is putting out a little bit better product in that regard.
So our final thoughts here on Justice League Action.
I think it's a good show. I look forward to, recording the episodes. Maybe I watch them, maybe I don't. But I want to see what characters show up because the proliferation of female characters. I think that, Zatanna is a cult favorite who is rarely used. Vixen has made several appearances in the live action things. So I think that, and she's a holdover from Justice League Unlimited. So I think that there are some characters there that could make their way into the show that could really strengthen it. Black Canary is also someone who's on TV a lot as well. So I think that you can plug some of those characters in and see where they come out and maybe create them and make them staples of the show.
All right, Matt.
I wanted to point out something I noticed, and correct me if I'm wrong, but other than the direct-to-DVD animated movies, is this the first time animated Superman has been without red underpants?
Probably.
I think so. I didn't
outside the
that.
direct-to-DVD stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I thought that was kind of neat because they're really sticking to that, and that's kind of redefined.
I guess you got to draw a line somewhere.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Okay.
I was not expecting that.
So that's our quick take on Justice League Action. You can follow us on the various social medias. We're at Danger Infinite on Twitter and Infinite Danger Room on Facebook, or you can shoot us an email, infinitedangerroom@gmail.com. Follow us on iTunes. Feel free to leave us a rating or a review if you'd like. You can also listen to us on SoundCloud and via newsok.com. So again, thanks for listening. For Matt Howlett and Anthony Brown, I am Matt Price. You guys have a great week.